The board split clean in half under her hammer, and when the wind tore the rest of the wall down, she didn't step back. So why did the man on the ridge finally start riding toward her? The second the wall gave way, the whole frame folded like it had been waiting for that moment. Wood hit the ground hard, nails pulled free. She stayed where she was, one hand still gripping the hammer, breath shallow in the cold air. A horse shifted somewhere behind her, close enough that she could hear leather creak. She didn't turn. Not yet. If he'd been watching, then he'd already seen enough. Another gust came through, colder than before, carrying the smell of snow. She bent down, picked up the same broken board, and set it back in place anyway. Behind her, the horse stopped moving. If you've ever kept going when you knew it might not be enough, tell me, would you have turned around? Ethan Hale pulled his horse to a slow stop at the top of the ridge, one gloved hand resting easy on the saddle horn. The late afternoon light stretched long across Redstone Ridge, turning the dry grass a dull gold. Wind came steady from the northwest, cold for the season. It carried the kind of bite that meant weather was turning. He was about to head back. Then he saw her. Down by the dry creek bed, where the earth dipped and twisted through a line of pale stones, a figure moved against the land, small, alone, working. Ethan narrowed his eyes, lifting his hand to block the glare. A woman, mid-20s maybe. She stood beside a rough frame of wood, if it could be called that, lifting a hammer and bringing it down with more force than the boards could take. The sound carried faint but sharp across the open ground. Crack. The plank split clean down the middle. She paused, shoulders tight, head lowered for a moment, like she might drop the hammer and be done with it. Instead, she bent, picked up another piece and set it in place. Ethan didn't move. He watched the way she worked. Not careless, not foolish. The fire pit was set right, tucked low where the wind wouldn't gut it. A strip of canvas lay pinned under stones, grass piled thick for bedding. She knew enough to survive, just not enough to last. Another gust rolled across the ridge, harder this time. He felt it press against his coat, tug at the brim of his hat. Down below, the frame of her shelter shuddered, the loose boards knocking against each other like dry bones. She leaned her shoulder into one side, steadying it, and swung the hammer again. The wood gave before the nail did. Ethan shifted in the saddle, leather creaking under his weight. His horse flicked an ear, sensing the change in him. He had ridden this stretch near every day for 3 years. Same fences, same water line, same empty routine. The land had a way of keeping a man moving even when he had nowhere left to go. This was not part of it. He could turn away, ride back, let it be what it was. That was how things worked out here. A man minded his own business. Another gust hit. Stronger. This time, one side of the structure folded in on itself. Boards slipped loose, nails tearing free with a dry, splintering sound. The woman staggered back, lost her footing, and dropped hard to the ground. Ethan's jaw tightened. She didn't cry out, didn't look around for help, just sat there in the dust, one hand braced behind her, the other resting across her knees. For a long moment, she didn't move at all. Then she pushed herself up. Slow, stiff. She walked back to the broken frame and started gathering the boards again, like it had never fallen. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Damn fool," he muttered under his breath. But it wasn't said with any heat. He looked past her, toward the horizon. The clouds had thickened, low and gray, building in a line that stretched farther than he liked. He'd seen that shape before. It didn't pass quick. 2 days, maybe less. He looked back at her. Her dress was worn thin at the elbows, boots scuffed down at the heel, hands wrapped in strips of cloth that had gone dark with use. She set another board in place, lifted the hammer again. The wind pushed at her, tugged loose strands of hair across her face. She didn't stop to fix it. Ethan felt something shift, quiet and unwelcome, somewhere deep in his chest. He turned his horse. The ridge fell behind him as he started down the trail toward home. Hooves pressed steady into the hard ground, each step taking him farther from the creek, from the woman, from something he hadn't meant to find. The light faded quick. By the time he reached the lower pasture, the air had turned sharp. Breath showed faint in front of him, the kind of cold that slipped in early and stayed longer than it should. He told himself it wasn't his concern. Told himself she'd made her choice same as anyone else who came west, thinking grit was enough. The ranch gate came into view, wood worn smooth from years of use. He swung down, opened it, led the horse through, then closed it behind him with a dull thud. Inside, everything sat as it always had. Barn quiet, yard empty, house dark. He unsaddled without hurry, hands moving through the same motions they always did. Brush, blanket, hang the tack, water the horse. Routine. That was what was left. When he stepped back outside, night had settled in full. The sky stretched clear overhead, stars sharp as broken glass. The wind hadn't let up. He stood there a moment longer than needed, one hand resting against the fence rail. Then, without thinking much about it, he turned his head, looked back toward the ridge. He couldn't see the creek from here. Too far, too dark. But in his mind, he could picture it plain enough. A small fire, weak, struggling against the wind. A frame of broken boards that wouldn't hold. He exhaled slowly. "She won't make it," he said, low, like he was testing the truth of it out loud. The words hung there in the cold air. Ethan stayed where he was a few seconds more. Then he turned and went inside, closing the door behind him. The fire in his own hearth burned steady, warm, safe. Outside, the wind kept moving, and somewhere past the ridge, a woman worked with wood that would not hold. Ethan woke before first light. No alarm, just the cold. It had crept through the walls sometime before dawn, settling into the boards, the floor, the air itself. He lay there a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind scrape along the side of the house. Same direction, same strength. He swung his legs over the bed and stood, pulled on his shirt, then his coat. The coffee tin sat where he'd left it. He measured without looking, poured water from the kettle, set it on the stove. Routine again. But his eyes kept drifting toward the window. By the time the coffee was ready, he was already outside. The sky had just begun to pale, a thin line of gray over the ridge. Frost clung low along the ground, crunching under his boots as he crossed to the barn. His horse lifted its head, watching him. "Easy," Ethan said, voice low. He saddled in silence, hands steady, movements practiced. He didn't tell himself where he was going. The trail to the ridge came back to him without thought. The same turns, the same narrow cut between rocks, the same rise where the land opened wide. He pulled the horse to a stop at the top, looked down. She was still there. The frame of the shelter leaned worse than the day before. One side gone entirely, boards scattered in a rough half-circle around it. The fire pit smoked faint, nothing more than a weak curl drifting into the cold air. Lila stood near what remained. She moved slower now, shoulders tight, every motion deliberate, like it cost her something to make it. She lifted a board, set it against the frame, and drove a nail through it. The board shifted before the hammer left her hand. She stopped, looked at it, adjusted it. Tried again. Ethan watched the angle, The way the grain split under pressure. The way the frame pulled against itself. Wrong from the start. He could see it clear as daylight. She wasn't building a wall. She was stacking failure. Another gust came down off the ridge, strong enough to bend the grass flat. It hit the frame and took what little balance it had left. The remaining side collapsed with a dull, final sound. Boards dropped. Nails tore loose. Lila didn't move. She stood there, staring at the ground where the wall had been. One hand still holding the hammer, the other hanging at her side, wrapped in cloth gone dark at the edges. Ethan leaned forward slightly in the saddle, waiting. The moment stretched. She lowered the hammer, looked at her hands, turned them over, slow, like she was seeing them for the first time. Then she walked forward and began picking up the boards again. No pause, no anger, no sound. Just starting over. Ethan exhaled through his nose. "That won't hold," he said under his breath. He knew it. She had to know it. But she kept going. He stayed a while longer, long enough to watch her set 3 more boards that wouldn't last the day, long enough to see the way her steps shortened, like the ground itself had gotten heavier. Then he turned the horse, back down the ridge, back toward the ranch. The sun was just clearing the horizon when he reached the yard. Light came thin and cold, not enough to warm anything. He unsaddled without rushing, fed the horse, checked the water trough, the same things he did every morning. But when he stepped into the barn, his gaze shifted. To the far wall. The stack of lumber sat where it had been for years, covered in a thin coat of dust, straight boards, dry, solid, bought for a project that never got started. Ethan walked over, ran his hand along the top piece, smooth, no split, no warp, good wood. He stood there a moment, then turned away. Inside the house, the coffee had gone cold. He poured it anyway, drank it standing at the counter, eyes unfocused, somewhere between the barn and the ridge. A knock came at the door. 2 short raps. Firm. Ethan set the cup down and opened it. Silas Boone stood on the porch, coat buttoned high, hat pulled low against the wind. His boots were clean. Too clean for a man who lived out here. "Morning, Hale," Silas said, stepping inside without waiting. Ethan closed the door behind him. "You're out early," Ethan said. "Business doesn't wait on weather," Silas replied. He glanced around the room, taking in the quiet, the order. "Loan comes due in the spring. Thought I'd remind you." Ethan didn't answer. Silas walked to the table, brushed a hand across the surface like he was checking for dust. "Town's been talking," he went on. "About folks taking in strays, about how that reflects on a man's standing." Ethan's eyes shifted just slightly. Silas noticed. "There's a line, Hale," he said. "Between helping and inviting trouble, reputation matters, especially when money's involved." Outside, the wind pressed against the walls again, harder this time. Ethan looked past Silas toward the window. The ridge sat somewhere beyond it, out of sight. "She won't last the week," Ethan said, quiet. Silas frowned. "What's that?" Ethan didn't repeat it. Silas let the silence hang, then shrugged. "Just keep your business clean," he said. "That's all I'm asking." He moved to the door, opened it, and stepped back into the cold. Ethan stood where he was, listening to the wind. Then he turned, walked back out to the barn. The boards were still there, untouched, waiting. He reached out again, pressed his palm flat against one of them, held it there. Solid. He closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them. Out past the ridge, something that would not hold was still being built. And here, under his hand, was something that would. He let his hand fall. stood there a moment longer, not moving, not deciding, but not walking away either. Ethan stood in the barn a long while after the wind died down to a steady hum. The boards didn't change. Still straight, still dry. Waiting. He reached for one at last, lifted it free from the stack, felt the weight settle into his hands. Solid. Reliable. The kind of wood that didn't argue with a hammer. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, he had the pack saddle laid out. He worked without hurry. 2 boards at a time tied down tight with rope, hammer, nails, the good saw, wrapped in cloth and set to one side. A canteen filled from the pump, strips of clean linen folded and tucked into a small tin. He checked the knots twice, then once more. The yard was quiet when he led the horse out. No one to ask questions. No one to give answers. The trail back to the ridge felt shorter this time. The wind met him halfway up, colder now. It carried a smell he didn't like. Wet stone, distant snow. When he reached the top, he didn't stop. He rode straight down. The horse picked its way careful over loose ground, hooves sliding once before finding hold again. The creek bed opened up ahead, pale and empty except for the scattered boards and one small fire burning low. Lila heard him before she saw him. She stood quick, turning toward the sound, one hand already reaching for the hammer. Not raised, just held. Ready. Ethan slowed the horse and stopped well short of her, 20 feet, maybe more. Enough space for a man to mean no harm. He didn't speak right away. Neither did she. The wind moved between them. Her eyes flicked once to the load behind his saddle, back to his face. Ethan swung down slow. Boots hit the ground with a soft thud. He kept his hands visible, easy at his sides. "Didn't mean to come in on you," he said. Her grip on the hammer didn't change. "You already did." Her voice was steady, tired, but not weak. Ethan nodded once. "That shelter won't hold," he said. She didn't answer. He stepped past the horse and loosened the rope. One of the boards slid free into his hands. He carried it a few steps forward and set it down near the broken frame. The wood looked different there. Out of place. Too straight. Too clean. "Grows colder by the day," he went on. "Wind'll turn worse before night." Lila's eyes followed the board, then the rest of the load. "You selling it?" she asked. "No." "Then why bring it?" Ethan met her gaze. "Because what you've got won't last." A long second passed. The fire snapped low behind her. A thin curl of smoke drifted off into the open air. She looked down at her hands. The cloth around them had come loose at one edge, darkened where the skin had split underneath. She tightened it without thinking. Then she looked back at the board. Ethan didn't move closer, didn't offer more. He set the hammer from his belt down beside the wood. "This'll hold the wind," he said. "Rest of it's on you." Silence again. Lila studied him. Not his size, not the horse, just his face, like she was measuring something she couldn't name. Then, slow, she stepped forward, not toward him, toward the wood. She bent, picked up the hammer he'd set down, tested the weight of it in her hand. "Show me where to start," she said. Ethan let out a breath, quiet. "All right," he answered. He moved then, not rushing, not taking over. He pulled the broken pieces down first, clearing space. Set aside what could still be used. Kicked the worst of it into a small pile without comment. Lila worked beside him. No wasted motion. No questions she didn't need to ask. "Corner posts first," Ethan said, setting one upright. "You want them plumb. If they lean, everything else follows." She held it steady while he checked the line. "Like this?" "Little more to the left." She adjusted, waited. He drove the first nail. Clean. Solid. The sound of it carried sharper than before. Different wood. Different answer. They worked through the morning without much talk. The rhythm came quick. Hand, hold, strike, measure, adjust, set. At one point her hand slipped. The hammer glanced off the nail and caught her knuckles. She pulled back fast, breath catching in her throat, but she didn't make a sound. Ethan paused, reached into the tin and held out a strip of cloth. She hesitated, then took it. "Thank you," she said low. He nodded. "Wrap it tighter. You'll lose strength if it swells." She did as told. No argument. By midday, the frame stood straight. Not finished, not close, but standing. They sat a few feet apart to eat. Ethan passed her a piece of dried beef and a heel of bread. She took it after a moment, turning it in her hands like she wasn't used to accepting things. "Name's Ethan," he said. She swallowed, then answered, "Lila." He nodded. "Where you headed, Lila?" She stared out past the creek, toward the line where the land dipped and disappeared. "Silver Junction," she said. "Or I was." He waited. "A man there wrote me," she went on. "Said he needed help. Said there was a place." She let out a small breath. "He married someone else before I got there." Ethan didn't react, didn't offer comfort. "Money ran out," she added. "Road kept going." He looked at the frame they'd raised. "Road's still there," he said. "So is Winter," she replied. That hung between them. Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans and stood. "Finish this up, it'll hold a few days," he said. "Maybe a week if the storm breaks wide." She looked up at him. "And after that?" Ethan picked up the hammer again. "After that," he said, "this won't be enough." He set another board in place, drove the nail through it, clean, solid. The sound carried out across the dry creek bed, and this time it held. By the time the last board was set, the light had already started to thin. The sky had turned a flat gray, the kind that swallowed distance. The wind no longer came in gusts. It pressed steady now, like it had settled in for the night. Ethan stepped back from the frame and looked it over. 4 walls, tight corners, a roof laid low and angled against the ridge. Not much to look at. But it would stand. Lila ran her hand along one of the posts, fingers tracing the grain. She pressed her palm flat against it, testing, then leaned her weight into the wall. It didn't move. She let out a breath, slow. "It'll hold," she said. "For a while," Ethan answered. She glanced at him, not arguing, just hearing it. He gathered his tools without rush, wrapped the hammer, counted the nails left in the tin. Movements quiet, practiced. The fire had been rebuilt. It burned steadier now, tucked in where the wind couldn't reach it. Lila stood near it, hands held out, the new cloth wrapped tighter around her knuckles. The heat touched her face, brought some color back to it. Ethan looked past her, toward the horizon. Clouds had thickened. Lower. He could almost feel the snow in them. "It'll come tonight," he said. She didn't ask what. "I've seen worse," she replied. Ethan nodded once. "Maybe." He finished tying the pack saddle, pulled the straps snug. The horse shifted under the weight but held steady. Lila watched him. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Another pause. She looked back at the shelter, at the boards, at the straight lines where there hadn't been any before, then back at him. "You didn't have to come back," she said. Ethan adjusted the rope once more, though it didn't need it. "No," he said, "didn't have to." He rested a hand on the saddle. "Ranch sits 3 miles west," he went on. "Fence line runs along the ridge you came down." She listened, said nothing. "Storm'll hit hard," he added. "This'll keep you through it." Through it, not beyond it. The words hung there. Lila looked at the ground for a moment, then back up. "And after?" she asked. Ethan met her eyes. "My place could use help," he said. "Cooking, keeping things straight. Come spring, more than that." He didn't step closer. "Pays fair," he added. "Room's got a stove." The fire snapped behind her. Lila didn't answer right away. She looked past him, toward the open land she'd come from, then at the shelter, then at her hands. The cloth had already darkened again at the edges. "You don't know anything about me," she said. Ethan shook his head. "Don't need to. That's not how most men think. I'm not most men." She studied him again, the same way she had that morning. Careful, measured. The wind picked up, pushing cold between them. "You offering charity?" she asked. "No." "Then what?" Ethan thought about that a second. "Work," he said. "And a place that'll hold." Another long pause. The fire shifted. A spark lifted and vanished into the air. Lila stepped back once, just enough to put the shelter behind her. "If I come," she said slowly, "I earn my keep." "You do? No questions about where I've been?" He nodded. "No questions." She held his gaze. "And I leave when I choose." Ethan didn't answer right away. Then he said, "That's your call." The wind pressed harder now. The first thin flakes came with it, light as dust. Lila looked up at the sky, watched one melt against her sleeve. Then she nodded. "All right," she said. Ethan exhaled once, quiet. "I'll come back at first light," he said. "Bring the horse for you." She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. He swung into the saddle, turned the horse toward the ridge. Halfway up, he looked back once. She had already moved inside the shelter, crouched near the fire, adjusting the stones around it, making it right, not waiting, working. Ethan faced forward again and rode on. The snow came thicker as the night settled in. By the time he reached the ranch, the ground had started to take it. Inside, the house felt the same. Quiet, ordered, empty. He lit the lamp, set it on the table. The light spread soft across the room. He stood there a moment, then moved to the stove and set water to boil. Morning came slow. The storm hadn't passed. It had only settled. Snow covered the yard in a thin, uneven layer. The sky stayed low and gray. Ethan saddled in the dark. A second horse this time. He rode out before the light had fully broken. The trail was harder to follow under snow, but he knew it well enough. The ridge came into view, pale and quiet under the storm. He made his way down. The shelter stood. Snow clung to the roof, but slid off where the angle held. The fire pit smoked faint through the drift. Lila stepped out as he approached, blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. Her eyes went to the second horse, then to him. He stopped a few feet away. "Still standing," he said. She nodded. It held. He gestured toward the horse behind him. "Time to see if something else will." Lila looked back once at the shelter. Then she picked up her small bundle, 2 pieces of cloth tied together. Not much inside. She stepped past him, slow but steady, and took the reins. Ethan didn't reach to help her mount. She managed it on her own. He watched, then turned his horse toward the ridge. They rode out side by side, the storm closing in behind them, toward a place that hadn't held anything in a long time, until now. The ranch came into view slow through the falling snow. First the fence line, then the barn, dark against the pale ground. then the house standing quiet with a thin line of smoke lifting from the chimney. Lila took it in without speaking. Ethan rode a little ahead, not looking back to see what she made of it. The gate creaked when he pushed it open. He held it wide enough for her horse to pass, then closed it behind them with a dull thud that carried in the still air. Inside, everything looked the same. Nothing new, nothing waiting. He led the horses to the barn and tied them off. Lila slid down from the saddle on her own, landing steady despite the long ride. She kept her bundle close, one hand resting on it without thinking. Ethan unsaddled in silence. He set a bucket under the pump, worked the handle until water ran clear and cold, passed it to her without a word. She took it, drank not fast, just enough. Then she handed it back. "Thank you," she said. Ethan nodded once and set the bucket aside. He opened the door to the house and stepped in first, not out of habit, but to light the lamp. The room filled with a soft glow, catching on the table, the stove, the empty chair near the wall. Lila stood in the doorway a moment before crossing the threshold. Her eyes moved slow across the room, not searching for comfort, just learning the shape of the place. "It's quiet," she said. "It stays that way," Ethan replied. He moved to the stove, added a piece of wood, adjusted the draft. The fire picked up, warming the air little by little. "There's a room off the back," he said. "Small, stove works. You can take it." Lila nodded. She didn't ask if anyone else lived there. Didn't ask about the empty chair. She walked past him, found the door, and pushed it open. The room was plain. A narrow bed, a folded blanket at the foot, a small iron stove in the corner, window facing east. She set her bundle down on the bed. Then she turned back. "You eat at a set time?" she asked. Ethan glanced at the clock on the wall. The hands ticked steady. "6, he said. She nodded again. "I'll be ready." That was all. The first few days passed without much talk. Lila rose before the light came up. He could hear her moving in the kitchen, quiet but certain. The scrape of a chair, the soft thud of a cupboard door. Water poured into a kettle. Coffee was ready by the time he stepped in. She didn't look up right away, just slid a cup across the table toward him without meeting his eyes. He took it. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once. No more than that. The place began to shift in small ways. Not all at once. The pantry shelves, once scattered, were sorted. Flour in one place, beans in another. Coffee tins sealed tight instead of left loose by the stove. Ethan noticed it the third morning when he reached for the sugar and found it where it should have been. He didn't say anything, just used it. Outside, the storm passed, but the cold stayed. Work went on, fences to check, water to break through the ice, cattle to count. Lila kept to the house mostly, cooking, cleaning, writing things down in a small ledger she found in the drawer. One evening, he came in to find her at the table, pencil in hand, lines neat and even across the page. "You keep books?" he asked. She didn't stop writing. "I used to," she said, "before the road." He stood there a second, then nodded and moved on. Word traveled. It always did. By the end of the week, Mrs. Carver at the general store had already taken notice. A woman at Hale's ranch. No family. No clear reason. Silas Boone came by again. This time he didn't step inside right away. He stood on the porch, snow melting off the brim of his hat. "Town's talking more," he said. Ethan didn't invite him in. "They'll talk," Ethan answered. Silas studied him. "Bank looks at more than numbers," he said. "Reputation weighs heavy." Ethan leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "Ranch is running," he said. "Debts get paid." Silas let out a breath. For now, he replied. But things shift quick when people lose confidence. His eyes flicked once past Ethan into the house. Just something to keep in mind. He turned and walked back to his horse. Ethan watched him go. That night, the house felt warmer than before. Not from the fire. From something else. Lila moved through the kitchen with a quiet rhythm, setting plates, pouring coffee, straightening things that had been left alone too long. Ethan sat at the table, hands resting flat against the wood. You don't have to fix everything, he said. She paused. I'm not fixing, she answered. He looked up. What are you doing then? She met his eyes for the first time that day. Making it hold, she said. He didn't answer. Just watched her a moment longer. Later, when the lamps were out and the house had gone still, Lila sat alone at the small table in her room. The ledger lay open. Next to it, a folded piece of paper she hadn't meant to keep. A receipt. Silver Junction. She stared at it a long time, then folded it again. Set it aside. Through the wall, she could hear Ethan moving once, then settling. She looked around the room. The stove gave off a steady heat. The blanket on the bed was thick enough. The window held back the cold. It was enough. Too much, maybe. Her eyes dropped to her hands. The cuts had begun to close, the skin rough but stronger. She closed the ledger, blew out the lamp, and lay down without taking off her boots. Before dawn, she was already awake. The decision had been made in the quiet. She moved through the room without sound, folded the blanket back the way she'd found it, set the ledger neatly on the table. In the kitchen, she paused. Everything was in place. Nothing left undone. She rested her hand once on the edge of the table, then turned away. Outside, the air cut sharp. She saddled one of the spare horses herself. Slow, careful, no mistakes. By the time the first light touched the ridge, she was already at the gate. She didn't look back. Not yet. The gate stood open behind her, the same way it had the morning she arrived. Only now the ground held her tracks both ways. Wind moved across the yard, low and steady, carrying the smell of coffee that had already gone cold inside the house. Ethan stepped out onto the porch a moment later. He didn't call her name, didn't rush, just stood there, one hand resting against the post, watching the distance between them grow. Then she stopped. It wasn't far. Just beyond the fence line where the land began to open again. Lila sat there in the saddle, still as the morning itself. The kind of stillness that comes when a person finally hears their own thoughts clear. She turned. Not fast. Not certain. Just enough. Ethan hadn't moved. The house behind him looked the same as it always had. Same boards, same roof, same quiet. But something in it held now. She looked at him a long second. Then she turned the horse back. No words. No promise. Just the sound of hooves coming home. Some folks think a place is built with walls and wood. But out here, it's built by what a man chooses to stand for, and who chooses to stand with him. Ethan didn't save her. He brought something that could hold. And Lila didn't stay because she had nowhere else to go. She stayed because, for the first time, she had a say in where she belonged. If you had to choose, would you ride away to protect someone you care about, or stay and face the storm beside them? And if stories like this stay with you, there are more waiting just beyond the next ridge.